The Phoenix Suns made another impressive hire on Monday to their coaching staff, bringing David Fizdale from the Utah Jazz front office to join their coaching staff. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, what that move tells us about how James Jones moves and why this franchise is becoming more and more modern and more appealing. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Tuesday. We are free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. So find us wherever you are. All you got to do is hit follow or subscribe. Get this show in your feed every single Monday through Friday. Become an everydayer. Get locked onto your favorite team throughout the offseason into next season. Hopefully, when the Suns finally win that first championship, you'll be right here for it. You can also follow along at Locked On PHX Suns to get new shows, engage, mailbag questions, all that good stuff over on Twitter. But we have some news to get to, as we tend to during this part of the year on the NBA calendar. Coaching news, free agency, the draft, trades, all of that here in the month of June and July. But today it was David Fizdale, the one-time Frank Vogel assistant in Los Angeles, one-time coach of James Jones in Cleveland, a two-time head coach in both Memphis and New York, and now a member of the Suns coaching staff. Most recently, he was a member of the Utah Jazz front office, where he was an associate general manager. And so I say all of that incredible resume for a pretty young dude to tell you that this is an impressive hire, not only because of all of that, but because reportedly Mat Ishbia ponied up here yet again. I don't remember where I heard this, but I think that Fizdale is making upwards of $1 million as well, in addition to Kevin Young, who we know is now making 2 or so. Those are two very good people to have in position. Those are two people in Kevin Young and David Fizdale who are head coach caliber talents in this league, who both bring a little bit more of an offensive acumen, who have more direct relationships with some of the other people in this organization that maybe Vogel doesn't. Obviously, Fizdale coached James Jones. We know Kevin Young has that relationship with Devin Booker, but I would even say Fizdale, that's one of the things he was known for, some of his, forward-thinking ways. You can agree or disagree. I think he got a pretty old-fashioned roster to work with in both of his head coaching stops, so maybe you might feel differently if you look at just his resume, but that's the book on him, as was, his ability to connect with guys. And so that all feels very well-rounded. You have some offensive background. You have now multiple well-recognized, well-regarded people, and then obviously Frank Vogel at the top, who has won a championship, who has been successful for the most part throughout his entire coaching career, and is known for obviously the defensive end of the floor. Obviously, there will be more people to fill this out. I personally would appreciate if the Suns were able to keep Patrick Mutombo. That's somebody that was a pretty up-and-coming coach when he got to Phoenix. He came by way of Toronto. He has done some work with NBA Africa. He had a relationship with Masai Ujiri, I believe. He was really ingrained in the player development side of the Phoenix Suns staff. Somebody like him, I would think, maybe has a chance to stick around if they liked him. But more than anything, that top 3 is really where you start. And from there, you build out player development. You build out, whatever the Suns see as the valuable pieces there. Preferably maybe some younger coaches as well. Guys who can, in their 30s, maybe, early 40s, who can continue to grow. Late 20s even. But where I want to go with this and the rest of the show is to zero in on that James Jones connection, because this is now another move that I think without a doubt reinforces that James Jones, I don't know, I'm not going to pretend to know the relationship dynamic between him and Mat Ishbia, but I do know that James Jones has obvious influence over how things have gone this offseason, right? The coach has a relationship and presided over the NBA capital of the agency that James Jones also has clear ties to. What I mean by that is Clutch, LeBron James's agency, Rich Paul's agency, the agency that represents a lot of Lakers players. Maybe I guess you could say Nick Nurse or Ty Lue. If they had come to Phoenix, that would have been even more clear because those guys are actually represented by Clutch. But Frank Vogel had his hands wet with the Lakers situation, experienced all of that. I don't know if LeBron was the biggest fan. I'm not sure LeBron can be the biggest fan of any coach. I don't know if any coach outside of Lue LeBron had the best relationship with. And even then, the toll that Cleveland situation clearly took on Ty Lue has been well documented. He had to take time away because of the stress of all of that. So even that probably wasn't, 100% perfect. I just think that Vogel getting the seal of approval from those guys, I would imagine that had a role to play in the way that Jones went about getting Vogel. Now you have the Fizdale angle. And Kevin Young, one of the things that was out there as that search was going on is that Kevin Young, had an ability to kind of thread the needle and be present and communicate and be well-liked by all of the components of the franchise, of the organization. And that matters. And so I would imagine that part of that was James Jones as well. And then the owner, right? I think that there is something legitimately impressive to be said about somebody like James Jones excelling at what I think is the number one job of an executive in sports, which is to sell your owner on your vision, right? And so we don't know who made the final call on Vogel. I'm willing to admit that may have been a little bit more from the owner. But did James Jones quit, make a stir, leak stuff to the press about how upset he is? No. What he did is he continued to make the best of not a bad situation, the best of a situation that we're not sure would have been his top choice. And that's part of, what middle management, right? That's kind of what James Jones is. He's not exactly running the operation. If you're not writing the checks, then there's a limit to how much say that you're going to have. And what James Jones did is continue to build. And even before this head coaching hire, you look at the way that he's been able to build out the front office, which I'll get to in a second. Now the trades that he's been able to make, even dating back to when Robert Sarver was owner, the number one thing that I think you can say about how James Jones turned this organization around was execute the vision of the owner in the way that made the most sense to James Jones and get the ball rolling in that direction. And he did it. He might have lost trades. He might have done all these things. There have been some periods of inactivity that I think understandably frustrated Suns fans. But where we are, I think, is a clearly better situation than obviously when Jones took over. And we are headed, as these moves continue to pile up, toward a direction that I think actually makes even more sense for James Jones. I'll tell you what I mean in a second. One last thing, and I want to clarify this because I think I said some different things on the podcast. I know on Twitter there was some confusion. I know there's been some reports throughout the offseason from different folks that made this confusing. I can say with confidence from having spoken with people that represent the Suns who asked to be not named just because the nature of this can be dicey, but in terms of what you're responding to, this rumor comes out. You don't want to give credence to that rumor, but there's still truth behind the general point, which is that James Jones reports to Mat Ishbia. Okay, there was a report out there right after the Suns season ended that named Jones as reporting to the CEO, the new CEO, Josh Bartelstein. I can tell you that's not true. Josh Bartelstein reports to Ishbia. James Jones reports to Ishbia. They do not report to one another. They work in the org chart. They are the two branches that come off of Ishbia, and they are equal with one another in effect. So, with that said, I want to get to where we're headed with James Jones and why this offseason actually lays a little bit more of a blueprint for what I think his ultimate destiny is in the NBA. We'll talk about it next. First, today's show brought to you by Game Time. Headed to San Diego later this month with the family. Padres, look, honestly, little bit rockier than we thought. But when we bought the tickets a while back on Game Time, they were hard to get. There was the beginning of the season. Obviously, a lot of hype around San Diego. It's their only game in town, literally, and we wanted to go. So we went to Game Time, which is the place for last-minute ticket details. My favorite part, last-minute ticket deals, my favorite part without fail is the images of your seat right there within the app, seat views. So you don't have to wonder, you don't have to go to a secondary website where somebody posted a grainy photo. Game Time has it for you. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll get always the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off when you make your first purchase at Game Time. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's go through some of the moves in the leadership space for the Suns over the past 12 months. Really, around this time last year, I remember doing a show that I don't think I ended up actually being able to put on YouTube, but about the Suns front office. If you remember, Kevin Arnovitz, who now doesn't work at ESPN, but he was pretty plugged into the Suns, did a lot of good work on this organization, had a big piece on the lack of size in this Suns front office, right? And there was some questionable, borderline trolling quotes by James Jones in that piece about how they prefer to keep things tight. They think it can be sometimes wasteful to overdo it with the scouting or player evaluation of guys whose files are then just going to sit on a hard drive somewhere or in some, filing cabinet, depending on whether they're, physical or digital. Maybe that was one of the changes Ishbia instituted. Hey, let's get this stuff going on a server rather than, manila folders. But you get my point. It was either James Jones covering for Robert Sarver, or it was James Jones making the best of a bad situation. Either way, his actions have spoken louder than his words over the past 12 months. And the promotion that he got to president, I think, matters here too. But the hires that I'm referring to are Morgan Cato, who came from the league office and seems to be more of a player liaison. It's really popular in the NBA these days, but the Suns have been really aggressive about it and have gotten good people in place with this stuff of player development, not just meaning your jump shot, not just meaning your dribble package or your film watching routine, but also what are you as a person? What do you need? What makes you click? What makes you tick, I should say, and what are the things that make you that drive you, right? And how can the basketball organization that employs you bring the most out of that, help you get the missions accomplished that you want to get accomplished, whatever. And I think Morgan Cato is somebody who brings that side of things at an even higher level, and I think also is passionate about developing more of that front office acumen. Otherwise, why take the job, right? Then you have a gentleman whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce, which I feel bad about, but Aditya, I think, is his first name. And he came from Baylor. A lot of people in this Suns front office, at least 2 or 3, are from Baylor. Gerald Madkins, who I actually I don't feel like I've seen him anywhere, but he was hired to this front office as an assistant GM, came from scouting, and he was a former player, and he's been in management for a slew of organizations at this point. I believe most recently the Knicks, or maybe most extensively the Knicks. In addition to Trevor Buckstein, who is their cap guy, who's already been here for a while. Ryan Resch, who's really like an operations guy, just a mover and shaker, the guy who seems to kind of just get things done. He really came from more of like he was a program manager at Baylor, a grad assistant type of role, and then came to the Suns and was, like a, chief of staff, director of operations, kind of just, wheeler and dealer type. Now he's risen to an even higher position, doing a lot of those same things here. You'll see his name referenced in a lot of this. And I list all this out not to just sort of, pat James Jones on the head and give him a, congrats. But where this now is for the Suns with all of that diversity, and I guess I mean it in terms of demographics and experience, which is important, but I mean it even more than that as difference of background, league office, college, veteran NBA minds, and then obviously within that, a few ex-players, but especially from James Jones's perspective, coming from the union background, from the extensive playing career on a whole bunch of great championship teams that earned him the nickname champ, which is a legit thing. People call him that. That's not just, I was telling my wife that, and she was like, okay, yeah, nobody, don't embarrass yourself calling him something like that. But that's really what he gets called. And like that should signify, if nothing else, the respect that he has, right? So I say all of that to say, and I will return to the promotion to president that he got, which was a little bit questionable at the time. Felt like it was done by an interim owner. What's the deal there? Is he even really able to do that? Is the next guy who actually buys the team just going to knock James Jones back down a peg? What does it mean if you're the general manager and the president? I don't know. I don't know any of that. I don't have answers to any of that. I think some of it was title only. I'm not even sure if he got a raise. I mean, I have no idea. I would hope so, but who knows, right? I think that's where this is headed, though. I think that we're headed toward a situation, and shout out to Espo over on PHNX. I tuned into their show for a little bit, and I have felt like this was coming for a while, but what Espo brought up that I think hammered it home even more and feels pretty plausible to me is that this David Fizdale hire might be planting the seeds for that. Now, Espo's, the king of the tinfoil hat. They do great content with that stuff over at PHNX, but even if I'm not willing to make the complete proclamation that Fizdale will end up being the general manager of the Phoenix Suns one day, because what do I know? I think it makes sense. And it makes sense to continue to bring these types of people in here who have these various backgrounds. I mean, even if you remember Monty, he spent some time in the front office in San Antonio when he was ready to dip back into the NBA world after the passing of members of his family. And then he did the Spurs thing, then ended up back in Philly, and then obviously became a head coach. Maybe that's what Fizdale wants to do. Or maybe this is just more experience to be around a championship team, which Utah is really more of a building team, So I don't know if it'll be Fizdale. I don't know if it'll be somebody like Madkins or Cato or Ryan Resch or whoever it ends up being, but the idea that James Jones will become a president only, I think feels really apt. Feels really likely, possible, because that seems to be the vision that maybe he's always had. And maybe really, again, to return to that Kevin Arnovitz piece where he had to sort of cop to the limitations of the staffing last summer. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise over time that he got his hands wet. But I think what makes James Jones special, and I will repeat, as a mind and a voice in an organization, I think is that he galvanizes people. I think that he has an eye for, let me bring this type of person in. Let me bring that type of person in. Let me correspond and work with my owner to execute something that'll make everybody happy, but that gets us closer to, what Ishbia says, a world-class organization that is very much owner speak, but it is a good way to put where I think they would like for this to go. Somebody in the mold of Masai Ujiri, Pat Riley, what Michael Winger now seems like he will be in Washington, which is another good example when it comes to the WNBA side, because Michael Winger, the guy that the Wizards just hired from the Clippers, he comes and he's now going to oversee the G League and the WNBA team as well at a very high level. The WNBA team's still going to have a GM and a head coach and all that, but that guy's going to be leading that. And James Jones feels like he could be along for that too. He already technically has that sort of role within the Mercury. I'm not sure how much he actually is involved, but I could see that growing over time as that organization builds and that league builds. And then same thing when they get a G League program. I could easily see, whether it's Fizdale, whether it's any of those people, somebody in the next couple of years getting promoted to be the day-to-day manager of the basketball side, and James Jones sitting above that and continuing to just be the eyes, the visionary, I guess, right? And then the GM was sort of the executor of that vision. I'm not trying to compare James Jones to Masai Ujiri or Pat Riley. What I'm saying is that type of high level is, I think, what James Jones is actually best at. It's kind of been sitting there in plain sight. And I think it even actually might help make up for some of the weaknesses that Suns fans feel like James Jones has in terms of not necessarily being ruthless and aggressive and prioritizing continuity and relationships and growth. I think that being somebody at the top level who maybe views things that way, but allows some control to be given up to the guys who maybe are a little younger, a little more forward thinking, or maybe not younger, maybe just different. I think that can really work. Pat Riley has Andy Ellisberg, who is a cap guy, really. And then Bobby Webster came up, I believe, through scouting under Masai. And I would imagine has a pretty different perspective as a result. So we'll see where this goes. But I think this is a cool opportunity now that we're seeing kind of what the brain trust is going to look like this season in Phoenix to establish that. Let's go forward one more step and talk about Ishbia, Booker, Durant, how this organization, I think, is kind of where a lot of modern NBA teams are trying to get, even if they're not in a perfect situation. I'll tell you what I mean next. First, today's show brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks came in, fixed daily fantasy sports, and now they're offering you up to $1 million through the rest of the NBA Finals. One Prize Picks user will win a chance to become a millionaire. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern will be randomly selected each day. If you get all 6 right in your 6-pick flex, you get $1 million. 5 correct, 80 grand. 4 correct, 16 grand. Full details can be found at prizepicks.com/million. You opt in at that link to be eligible. Once you do, all you have to do is play the game like normal, and you could be that lucky winner. Get one more chance to fill out a 6-pick flex and win up to $1 million. If you have not joined Prize Picks already and you want to take advantage of the offer, download the app now or go to prizepicks.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDON at sign up to get an instant deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And then go find that prizepicks.com/million link to enter for up to $1 million. Closing out the show, what does it mean to be a modern NBA franchise? I think it can mean a lot of things. I think that anything from sports science to innovative sponsorships to high-tech arena to anything can fall into that. Maybe people smarter or more plugged in than me have the right answer for what the most modern NBA franchise is, but I think the Suns are pretty darn close. And what I mean by that is more in the people side of things. They have a practice facility. They have this arena renovated. They, are doing whatever they're doing with the TV side of things, presuming that clears the legal hurdles and they make it work and they come to an agreement with Bally and everything else. Sure, all of that matters. Not exactly my direct area of expertise, but when I look at who is at the top of this organization, I think it's another example of that. All right? Start with the owner. Spends. Like, that's ingredient number one. You can't not have an owner who's willing to spend in the modern NBA and expect to be a perennial contender. You might get lucky. You might end up with generational players. The Milwaukee Bucks, I don't think are, the most extreme high expenditure ownership group, but they had Giannis. They've gone over the tax. They've gone deep into the tax to make that work, and they make it happen. But to be forever, perennially, perpetually a contender, you have to be willing to spend that type of money all the time. It seems like Ishbia, at least for the next several years, is committed to doing that. I think caring about basketball the way he does matters here. I'll continue to check in on the good and the bad of having a hands-on owner. I think on the whole, a lot of the moves you would probably say have been pretty good in that regard and have been in line with what the fans want. So, hard to complain so far. But I think just having basketball be such a passion has to matter because there's not a lot of guys who get to, 40 whatever years old and make billions of dollars off of what was a family business and basically just say, okay, I'm going to spend all that on a basketball team. Like that's a level of commitment. I don't know if I would be so eager to spend all of that newfound wealth on one thing unless I cared about it that much. And he obviously does. Then you have James Jones, who I talked about. Then you have Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, two superstar pillars. Yes, one of them is maybe on the older side. That is unavoidable. I mean, yeah, would we all like to have in the NBA two prime superstars at the same time? Sure. But, even Shaq was a little older than Kobe. It's incredibly hard to line those up, right? And then they have Frank Vogel, who to me is what an organization with this type of structure tends to go for. I think Kevin Young would have fallen in that as well. Again, look no further than the Bucks. They are a team that, went with their superstars' wishes and got an up-and-coming assistant who can innovate and connect and all the things that you want. I think Frank Vogel is clearly another type of guy like that, right? Philadelphia with Nick Nurse, checks that similar box. I would say, I don't know, even Sacramento, went out and got a high-level former assistant in Mike Brown, and that has worked. Like, that model also has a good track record. Michael Malone with Denver, that's not an ownership group or a franchise that I would say represents all the pinnacle of modern NBA. They don't even have a practice facility, but the coach part works, right? That is sort of the model for what you want, is to have people like Kevin Young in the building, people like Vogel in the building, and try to make it all work together with the superstar players, an owner who's willing to spend, and a visionary guy as the president who kind of tries to build out the organization from the ground up and from the branches out. I say all of that to remind you because I do just feel like maybe a sense of responsibility, I don't know, to remind all of you that the Suns are in a good position. I think that there is a particular level of pressure and stress that comes along with the franchise that has never won a championship. And I'm not going to try to dissuade anybody from feeling that pressure or feeling that desire. I mean, we're going on, 55, 56 years now of this organization existing. It's more than fine for people to want, somebody like Al McCoy to see a championship. People who have literally been here the whole time. That said, you can be very good and still not win. You can be very good and be on your way to winning. The point is, I think that when you look big picture at where this franchise is, that feels right, Is there some world in our wildest imaginations where, it's still a really wealthy guy like Mat Ishbia, but maybe it's Bob Myers, Ty Lue, and then, Mikal Bridges looking like the best version of himself on the Nets is the Suns' number 2, and they have Ayton feeling himself and looking great. Yeah, okay, sure. But I think most organizations would trade what they have for what the Suns have at the drop of a hat. Doesn't mean it's going to result in the championship. Doesn't mean the Kevin Durant trade is a certifiable, guaranteed title. Nothing is. But as we've sort of blown out our scope in each segment here, which I like to do these big picture types of shows sometimes, from hiring Fizdale all the way to here, I think that Suns fans should feel a lot better about the overall depth of smart basketball people, creative basketball people, passionate basketball people who are in this franchise now that were not as recently as not even 5 years when James Jones got here, but even 4 years ago before Monty got here, when the coaching staff was full of a bunch of guys who just needed a job and the talent on the roster was terrible and everything else. This is pretty good. Is it the best? You tell me. But I'll take pretty good over terrible any day. That'll wrap us up. More to come this week. Hoping to get a X's and O's analytics guru who is a big Lakers fan to come tell us all the things that we need to know about Frank Vogel. Aaron Edwards will be here, so everydayers, that is what you can look forward to as we move through the week. Hit follow or subscribe to become an everydayer if you haven't already. And I will hit you guys on Thursday for the next show.